The cast-iron pot was already bubbling. Ethan stood stone still in his own doorway, trail dust still thick on his clothes, every bone aching from 23 days pushing cattle to Abilene. His kitchen, the kitchen, where his dear mother had cooked until the consumption took her, glowed with lamplight that had no earthly business being there. A woman's back, straight as a hymnal spine, bent over the majestic cook stove he'd bought his mother just before she passed. The wooden spoon in her hand moved in those steady circles his mother used to make, stirring something that smelled like heaven itself, beef and onions and carrots from somebody's garden. His stomach cramped up so fierce he nearly doubled over. The woman didn't turn around. "Water's hot in the wash basin," she said, calm as Sunday morning. "The lye soap's fresh made. Your mother's towel is right where she always kept it." Buck's reins slipped clean out of Ethan's hands. The leather slapped against the porch boards his father had laid 15 years back. The sound should have startled her. She just kept stirring. His right hand moved toward where his daddy's old Navy Colt should have been. But he'd sold it in Abilene when beef prices came in lower than expected. $40 for 3 months' work was enough to make any man desperate. Though what exactly he planned to do about a woman cooking Christian supper in his kitchen, he couldn't rightly say. Mrs. Thompson, the name came out rough as sandpaper. He recognized her now, the banker's widow, the woman who'd stood silent as a church mouse while her husband foreclosed on 2 farms last winter. Now she turned, just her profile in the yellow lamplight. Willa Thompson, 30-some years old, widowed since the spring thaw. The same woman who'd handed him the foreclosure papers on the Hendricks place, her hands shaking just a little while her husband counted out other folks' misery in coins. "Mr. Holloway," she turned back to her pot, "supper'll be ready in 10 minutes. You'll want to wash up first. You look like you've been riding with the devil's own dust storm." The pure ordinariness of it, her certainty, his bewilderment, the homely smell of that stew made something catch in his throat. His legs, working on their own recognition, carried him 3 steps into the kitchen before his mind took charge again. "What in the Sam Hill are you doing in my house?" She lifted the spoon, tapped it twice against the pot's rim, exactly the way his mother used to do. "Cooking supper. I can see that plain enough." "Why?" "Because you need to eat, and I need—" She stopped, her shoulders pulling back like she was preparing for a blow. "I need to be somewhere that isn't 12 empty rooms with nothing but Edgar's portrait for company." The words hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. Ethan's eyes went to the table, his mother's good pine table that seated 6 when the circuit preacher came through. 2 plates sat there. The blue willow china from his mother's hope chest, the ones she'd brought from Tennessee, 2 forks, 2 knives, 2 cups with coffee already poured, steam rising like morning prayers. "How'd you know I'd be back today?" "Sam at the freight office mentioned it when I was buying flour. Said you'd wired ahead about storing the extra tack." She adjusted the damper on the stove, keeping the heat just right. "Sam's got a mouth bigger than the Brazos River." Sam, of course. In a town of 300 Christian souls, everybody knew everybody's business before they knew it themselves. "Your husband passed in March." It wasn't a question, but she nodded anyway. 6 months, 4 days. The cancer ate him from the inside out. "And you thought you'd just let yourself into my house?" Door wasn't latched proper. That don't make it an invitation. She finally turned full around, and in the lamplight he could see what these 6 months had cost her. She'd gone thin in that deliberate way women do when they forget to eat, when there's nobody to cook for. Her good black bombazine dress probably cost more than he'd make in 6 months, hung loose at the shoulders. Her wedding ring was gone. Just a white band of skin where 8 years of marriage had sat. "Mr. Holloway, When did you last eat a meal that wasn't trail beans and hardtack? The question knocked him sideways. He tried to remember. Yesterday morning, day before, somewhere around the Red River crossing, time had gotten muddy as the water. When did anyone last cook you a proper supper, set a proper table, say grace over food meant to nourish instead of just survive? His mother, 3 years ago come November, before the consumption took her, before his father followed her 6 months later, like he'd decided there wasn't much point in staying without her, before Ethan learned that alone was easier than watching people leave. Willa Thompson read it all in his silence. She turned back to the stove, picked up a dish towel embroidered with tiny roses, his mother's handiwork, and lifted the lid off the Dutch oven. The smell of cornbread, sweet with sorghum molasses, filled the kitchen like a hymn. "I'm not asking for anything improper," she said, her back to him again. "Not company beyond Christian charity, not conversation beyond weather and crops, not anything that would shame your mother's memory or mine. Just sit at a table with another soul who understands what empty sounds like. Eat food that tastes like something, then I'll go home. And if you don't want me here again, you leave that lamp unlit tomorrow night." The lamp. She was giving him a way out before he'd even thought to ask for one. Light it. She'd come. Leave it dark. She'd stay away. Simple as that. Before we continue, please leave a like and subscribe. Let me know which city you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the story. Ethan's legs made the decision while his mind was still sorting through the peculiarity of it all. He found himself at the wash basin, sleeves rolled up past his elbows, working the fresh lye soap between his palms. The water was hot enough to cut through 3 weeks of trail grime, but not so hot it scalded time just right, like she'd been watching for him through the front window. The soap stung where the rains had rubbed his hands raw. He splashed his face, felt the whiskers rough as a corn cob under his fingers. In the small mirror above the basin, the one his mother had insisted on, he looked like something the cat wouldn't bother dragging in. Eyes red-rimmed from dust, cheeks hollow from eating poor, a shirt that might have been white back in Abilene. Behind him, he heard the scrape of the pot moving across the stovetop, the soft thump of bowls being set down. When he turned, toweling his face with the rough linen, she was already seated, hands folded for grace, waiting. The lamplight caught the silver threads in her dark hair, pulled back in that severe bun all the bankers' wives wore, but with wisps escaping around her temples like even her hair was tired of pretending. She looked worn down to bedrock, but her back stayed straight as a fence post. Ethan sat. The chair creaked, the same creak it made when his father used to settle in for supper. The stew steamed between them. Chunks of beef that must have cost dear money. Potatoes and carrots swimming in gravy thick as cream. "Lord," Willa said, eyes closed, "we thank you for this food and for the hands that prepared it. We thank you for bringing Mr. Holloway safe home from the trail. Bless this meal to our body's use. In Jesus' name, amen." "Amen," Ethan echoed, the word rusty in his throat. She picked up the ladle, his mother's ladle, with the bent handle, and filled his bowl first, then hers. Set the cornbread between them, still warm enough to fog the air above it. Then she picked up her spoon and waited. He took the first bite. The beef came apart on his tongue, tender as mercy. Salt, black pepper, and something else, thyme from the garden that had gone wild since his mother passed. His throat tightened around the second spoonful. "Slow down," she said, not unkind. "It's not going anywhere." He forced himself to chew proper, aware of her watching him over her own spoon. She ate like everything else she did, deliberate, controlled, no wasted motion. Your cattle made it to market, not a question. Ethan reached for the cornbread, broke off a piece. Most of them lost some at the crossing. 4 head. Current was running mean after those August storms. She nodded, understanding what 4 head meant $60 gone to the Brazos River. Edgar always said late summer was treacherous for crossing. The name sat between them, heavy as a horseshoe. Edgar Thompson, who'd held paper on half the county, who'd counted money like other men counted prayers. Mrs. Thompson? Ethan set down his spoon. Why my house? Her spoon paused halfway to her mouth. She set it back in the bowl, careful not to clank it against the china. You live alone, no wife to scandalize, no family to shame, no expectations to overturn. Her fingers found that white band where her wedding ring used to sit, rubbed it once. And you understand what empty sounds like. The words settled into his chest like stones in still water. He did understand empty the way it pressed against your ears at night, made you talk to the horses just to hear something besides your own breathing and the house settling into its bones. Your house has 12 rooms. Edgar built it to impress, a monument to the Thompson name. She broke off a piece of cornbread, smaller than a child would take. I used 2 of them, the kitchen and the bedroom. The rest just gathered dust and echoes. Some nights I walk through them just to hear my footsteps on something besides the same 2 floors. That's why you're here. I'm here because Tuesday last, I set Edgar's place at the table like I'd done every night for 8 years. Set it and sat there waiting for someone who was 6 months in the ground. She looked straight at him then, no shame in her eyes, just fact. That's when I knew I had to do something or go the way of the widow Hartley. The widow Hartley had stopped eating after her husband died, just wasted away until her nephew found her cold in her bed. Weighing no more than a child. I'm not looking for... Ethan stopped. What wasn't he looking for? Neither am I. She went back to her stew. I know what folks say about widows, what we scheme for, what we want, but I had a husband for 8 years, Mr. Holloway. I sat across from him at supper every night. He read his newspapers and ledgers. I did my needlework. We had nothing to say to each other after the first year, and even less after. Her jaw worked sideways, biting something back. The babies, she said, voice steady as a church bell. 2 of them. Neither lived long enough to draw breath. Edgar said dwelling on it was female weakness, said we'd have more, but we never did. And he stopped coming to my room after the second one. Said it was God's judgment that I was barren. The words hung raw in the air between them. Ethan's hands tightened on his spoon. His own wife, dead these 3 years, had never quickened with child in their 2 years together. But Mary had held him when he grieved it, not called it God's judgment. Tonight, Willa continued, I wanted to cook for someone who'd taste the food. Tomorrow, you'll want your solitude back. I understand that. She stood, then, began clearing her bowl, though it was still half full. Ethan watched her move to the wash basin, pump the handle twice. Water splashed into the copper basin. The sound too loud in the quiet kitchen. Leave the dishes, he said. I don't leave messes. Of course she didn't. She washed her bowl with the same deliberate care she'd done everything else. Dried it with his mother's dish towel, set it back in the cupboard exactly where it belonged. Mrs. Thompson? She turned at the door, one hand on the latch. How did you know I'd be back today? Really? Something shifted in her face, not quite a smile, but close enough to remind him she'd been young once. Before Edgar Thompson got his hands on her, I've been lighting your lamp every night for a week, Mr. Holloway, cooking supper and taking it home to eat alone when you didn't come. The door closed soft behind her. Through the window, he watched her climb into Edgar's old buggy, too fancy for a woman alone, with its brass fittings and leather seats. She didn't look back at the house, just clicked her tongue at the horse and rolled away into the darkness. Ethan stood at that window until he couldn't hear the wheels anymore. Then he turned back to his kitchen, invaded, disrupted, impossibly warm, and saw what she'd left on the table. His lamp, the Rochester lamp from the front window. She'd set it square in the center of the table, wick trimmed, fresh and clean, the globe polished clear as spring water. 3 nights passed. The first night, he burned beans trying to cook them himself. The smell of char filled the kitchen, and he opened all the windows to air it out even though the evening had turned cold. He ate them anyway, standing at the counter, washing each bit of bite down with water from the pitcher. The second night, he didn't even try, just ate cold cornbread left from some attempt at cooking 2 days before. Hard as hardtack now. The lamp sat on the table where she'd left it, accusing him with its readiness. The third night found him sitting in the dark, too stubborn to light the lamp, too proud to admit he was listening for buggy wheels on the road. The darkness pressed in from all sides, thick as wool blankets. Every small sound the house settling, mice in the walls, wind through the eaves, seemed loud as thunder. His stomach cramped from hunger. 3 days of poor eating on top of 3 weeks on the trail had left him hollow as a rain barrel in drought. But it was more than hunger gnawing at him. It was the memory of her sitting across from him, the simple rightness of 2 plates on a table, the sound of another person breathing in his kitchen. He struck a match. The flame danced in the darkness, so bright after sitting in the black that he had to squint. He touched it to the lamp wick, watched the fire catch and spread along the cotton, adjusted the flame until it burned steady and warm. He set it in the window. Then he sat at the table and waited. The moon hadn't risen yet when he heard it wheels turning off the main road onto his property. Steady, unhurried. He didn't move, didn't want to seem eager. The wheels stopped, footsteps on the porch, sure as sunrise. The door opened without a knock. Willett Thompson stood in his doorway holding a covered pot, steam escaping from under the lid. The smell hit him before she spoke. Chicken and dumplings, sage and black pepper, comfort itself. Evening, Mr. Holloway. Mrs. Thompson. She moved into the kitchen like she belonged there, set the pot on the stove, saw the failed attempts at cooking scattered across the counter, the burned pan, the rock-hard cornbread, the coffee pot boiled dry and black. When did you last eat proper? Don't recall. She tied on an apron she brought her own this time, blue calico with tiny yellow flowers. Working quick but not rushed, she lit the stove, set water to heat, laid out 2 plates without asking if he wanted her to stay. I brought apple dumplings too, she said, not looking at him. Made with the last of the August apples from the tree behind the bank. They were Edgar's favorite, but he's not eating them anymore, and it seems a waste to let them rot. She turned then, and in the lamplight he saw something in her face he hadn't noticed before. Not just loneliness or determination, but a kind of desperate hope, fragile as frost. Mrs. Thompson, he said, what happened to your lamp? The one you were lighting at my place while I was gone. Her hands stilled on the pot lid. Agnes Thompson took it, Edgar's sister, said I had no business carrying lamps to men's houses, said she'd contest the will if I kept behaving like a... She stopped, but he heard the word she didn't say. The bell above Morrison's door clanged hard enough to make everyone in the store turn. Mrs. Garrett stood by the fabric counter, fingers testing a bolt of blue calico. The Hendricks boys were loading feed sacks onto their wagon bed through the side door. Old Walter Pike sat on the pickle barrel, working a piece of cedar with his pocket knife, shavings curling onto the floor, Every last one of them stopped what they were doing to stare. Morrison kept his eyes on his ledger, pencil moving across the page. "Help you, Holloway." Ethan moved toward the coffee shelf, boot heels striking the pine floorboards. The whispering started before he'd taken 3 steps, Biscarrett leaning toward Mrs. Davis, hands cupped around her mouth, but not trying hard enough to keep quiet. It going on 2 weeks now. Bold as brass. That widow. Poor Edgar, not cold in the ground. The coffee tin felt light when he picked it up, nearly empty. The Arbuckle's brand, with the Flying Angel on the label, 70 cents per pound, dear as gold. But Willa had made it strong and good that morning, the way coffee ought to taste. He grabbed 2 more tins. That's considerable coffee for one man. Mrs. Morrison had appeared beside him, corn broom in her hands. She swept in short, vicious strokes, pushing dried mud and tobacco juice stains directly onto his boots. "Course, maybe you're not drinking alone these days." The bristles scraped across the leather, back and forth, raising dust that settled on his duck cloth pants. Mrs. Morrison's mouth had pulled into something that might have been a smile if there'd been any kindness in it. "Heard the Widow Thompson's been keeping your house?" Ethan looked down at his boots, now covered in the mess she'd swept onto them. Then he looked at Mrs. Morrison's face, flushed with the pleasure of her spoil cruelty. He stepped forward through the pile of dirt she'd made, tracking it across her clean floor in long, deliberate steps, and set the coffee on the counter. The Arbuckles, all 3 tins. Morrison's pencil scratched across the page. Behind him, his wife attacked the floor with her broom, bristles beating against the boards like she was trying to punish them. "Need anything else?" Morrison asked without looking up. 10 pounds of flour, 5 of sugar, the good white sugar, not the brown. That's 50 cents for the flour, 30 for the sugar, and 60 for each coffee. Morrison's pencil moved down the column. $1.40 for the lot. Mrs. Morrison had moved closer, sweeping the same clean spot over and over, just making noise now. "Strange times we live in," she said to the air above Ethan's head. "When women forget proper Christian mourning, my mother wore black for 2 years when Papa passed. 2 years, but these modern women, seems they can't wait to $1.40. Holloway." Morrison's voice cut across his wife's. Ethan counted out the coins. Morrison's hand hesitated over them, not taking them yet. "You know, Agnes Thompson was in yesterday. Edgar's sister. That's so. She's concerned about appearances. Says the family's mighty upset about Willa carrying on so soon after. My money good here or not?" Morrison swept the coins into his till, but his wife wasn't done. "That woman was never right for Edgar Thompson." The broom handle cracked against the floor as she set it down hard. "Too quiet, too peculiar. 8 years married and not one baby to show for it. What kind of wife? The kind that's none of your business." The words came out flat as hammered iron. Mrs. Morrison's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish behind the pickle barrel. Walter Pike let out a low whistle. Ethan picked up his purchases. Mrs. Morrison stepped directly into his path, blocking the door. "Mr. Holloway, you don't know what you're getting tangled up in. That woman, there's talk she hastened Edgar's passing. He was sick, yes, but not that sick. And then sudden like he's dead and she's what? Trying to live her life. Throwing herself at the first man who'll have her. The store went church quiet. Even the Hendricks boys stopped loading feed." Ethan stepped around Mrs. Morrison and pushed through the door, bell clanging overhead. He was tying the supplies to Buck's saddle when boot heels clicked on the boardwalk behind him. Agnes Thompson stood there in full mourning dress. Black silk from hat to hem, though it was her brother who died, not her husband. The veil covering her face couldn't hide the sharp set of her jaw. Behind her stood Sheriff Daniels, looking uncomfortable as a cat in a washtub. "Mr. Holloway, Miss Thompson, I need to speak with you about my sister-in-law." "No, you don't." Red flushed up her neck. "I most certainly do. That woman is disgracing my family's name, and you're helping her do it." Buck shifted under Ethan's hand, sensing trouble. Ethan kept working the leather straps, not looking at Agnes. "She's been seen at your property multiple times, at inappropriate hours. She cooks supper. She's a recent widow who needs to eat, same as anyone." Agnes grabbed his arm, fingers digging through his shirt sleeve like bird talons. "You don't understand what's at stake. Edgar left her the house and a monthly allowance. But there were conditions, moral conditions. If she violates them, then what?" Ethan turned to face her full on. "You'll take away her home, leave her with nothing because she made me chicken and dumplings. Because she's behaving like a Agnes caught herself." Glanced at the gathering crowd. Half of Morrison's customers had followed them outside, drawn by the smell of scandal. "Like a what, Miss Thompson? Say it clear so everyone can hear." Her mouth worked, but she seemed to realize she was surrounded by witnesses. When she spoke again, her voice came out low and mean as a snake's hiss. "I've written to Judge Garrett. Edgar's will can be contested if Willa brings scandal to the Thompson name. And this, whatever this is, it's scandal plain as day. It's supper, Miss Thompson, just supper. It's impropriety, and the whole town knows it." She released his arm, wiped her gloved hand on her skirt like she'd touched something unclean. "Stay away from her, Mr. Holloway, for both your sakes." She turned on her heel and marched toward the bank, Sheriff Daniels trailing behind like a whipped dog. That evening, Willa arrived while the sun still hung above the hills, earlier than usual. She carried a covered basket and something else, a weight in her shoulders, a tightness around her eyes. "You heard about Agnes?" she said. Not a question. She made sure I did. Willa unpacked the basket on his table, fresh bread, still warm from the oven, butter in a small crock, ham sliced thick. Her hands moved steady, but he saw the tremor when she set down the butter dish. "She means it, about contesting the will. Can she?" Judge Garrett is her mother's cousin, and Edgar did include a morality clause. She unwrapped the ham, began laying slices in the iron skillet. "I'm to maintain appropriate moral standing befitting the Thompson name or forfeit my inheritance, and cooking supper violates that." A laugh, short and bitter as quinine. "According to Agnes, breathing violates it." The ham sizzled in the pan, filling the kitchen with the smell of smoke and salt. Willa stood at the stove, her back to him, shoulders pulled up tight. "There's more." She reached into her basket, pulled out 3 envelopes, set them on the table between them. "These were pushed under my door 3 nights running." Ethan picked up the first envelope. No name on it, just Widow Thompson in block letters. The paper was cream-colored, the kind Morrison sold for 15 cents a sheet. Inside, the same block letters. "You know what you are. Leave town before we make you." The second was worse. "Shameless women get what they deserve. Accidents happen." The third made his hands clench. "Your chicken coop burns easy. Might be a shame if you were inside when it caught." Who? No signature. "But that cream paper Morrison's is the only store that carries it." Ethan set the letters down, his jaw tight enough to crack teeth. "You tell the sheriff. Sheriff Daniels is married to Agnes's best friend." Willa turned from the stove, faced him square. "I'm alone in this, Mr. Holloway, or I was." The late sun slanted through the window, catching her face sideways. There were lines there he hadn't noticed before, not from age, but from worry. The kind that came from checking windows at night, from jumping at every creak of the house, from never knowing if tonight would be the night someone made good on their threats. His hand moved without thought, covering hers where it rested on the table. Her skin was rough from lye soap, warm from standing near the stove. She didn't pull away, but she didn't turn her palm up to meet his either. "You're not alone now." She looked at their hands, his scarred from rope and wire, hers reddened from washing, then up at his face. Something shifted in her eyes, not quite hope, but maybe the possibility of it. This will get worse before it gets better. If it gets better at all, I know. They'll come after you too, your reputation, your business, everyone you sell cattle to. Let them try. She turned her hand palm up, laced her fingers through his, just for a moment, warm and certain. Then she pulled away, went back to the stove. "We should meet earlier, before folks finish their supper and start looking for entertainment. All right. And maybe not every night. Every other night would be more proper. If that's what you want." She turned with the skillet in her hand, ham perfectly brown at the edges. "It's not about what I want, Mr. Holloway. It never has been." They ate in silence, but not the empty silence of eating alone. This was different, charged with understanding, with choices being made without words. When she left, earlier than usual, the sun still painting the sky orange and pink, she paused at the door. "Mr. Holloway, Ethan, there's something else. Agnes has been asking questions about your property lines, about the survey markers between your land and what used to be Edgar's. Sheriff Daniels was out there yesterday with some men, looking around." She left before he could ask what that meant, but standing at his window, watching her buggy disappear into the dusk, he saw them fresh wagon tracks cutting across his back pasture, heading toward the old survey markers. What was Agnes Thompson planning to dig up? Or worse, what was she planning to bury? Sunday morning came with frost on the fence rails, October cold settling early into the hill country. Ethan loaded his toolbox into the wagon hammer, saw a coffee can full of square-cut nails, the wood plane his father had brought from Tennessee. The lumber came from behind his barn, seasoned pine he'd been saving for winter repairs. The back road to Willa's place wound through cedar breaks and limestone outcroppings, longer than the main road, but less likely to set tongues wagging. Buck knew the way now, had traveled it 3 times since that evening at Morrison's store. The Thompson house sat on 40 acres of prime bottom land, 2 stories of cut limestone and cedar timber that must have cost Edgar $5,000 to build. Ethan had only seen it from the main road before a monument to prosperity, too big for any Christian purpose. Now, pulling into the side yard, he saw what the distance had hidden. Paint peeling from the shutters, weeds growing through the porch boards. A garden gone to seed behind a broken fence. But it was the chicken coop that stopped him cold. Half the roof had caved in, broken boards scattered across the dirt like thrown dice. The remaining chickens, maybe 6 birds, huddled in what shelter remained. The rest lay in Willa's basket, necks wrung, ready for plucking. She stood in the wreckage wearing a man's work shirt over her dress, one of Edgar's. Probably. Sleeves rolled up past her elbows. Blood streaked her apron where she'd been handling the dead birds. Her hair had come loose from its pins, hanging around her face in dark strings. "Storm?" he asked, though he knew better. The big oak beside the coop showed no wind damage. "Tuesday night?" Her voice came out flat. The storm was in August. This just finally gave way. 4 days she'd been dealing with this. 4 days while she cooked his suppers and smiled through Agnes's threats. Ethan climbed down from the wagon, walked through the debris. The support beam had rotted through at the base, should have been replaced 2 years ago, maybe 3, the kind of thing any farmer would notice. But Edgar Thompson hadn't been a farmer. Edgar always said he'd fix it. Willa set the basket of dead chickens in the shade, said it every time I mentioned it, then he'd go back to his ledgers and forget. Ethan picked up a broken board, examined the grain. Good wood, just neglected. Most of it could be salvaged. Got a hammer in the barn. Nails, some. Then let's fix it. She looked at him straight on then, and he saw what the last week had cost her. Dark circles under her eyes, a scrape on her cheek from handling the rough boards. Her hands were shaking just slightly, probably from exhaustion. "Mr. Holloway, you don't have to—" "Yes," he said, "I do." The barn was 3 times the size of his, built to hold Edgar's fancy carriage and the 6 horses Agnes had mentioned. Now it stood mostly empty. Just Willa's buggy and the one old mare that pulled it. Tools hung on the walls, good quality but dusty, like they'd been bought for show and never used. Ethan loaded what they needed into the wheelbarrow. When he came back out, Willa had cleared the broken boards into neat piles, salvageable wood in one, kindling in another. She worked with economy, no wasted motion, sorting the mess with the same precision she used in the kitchen. "Hold this!" He positioned a new support beam, needing it braced while he secured it. She grabbed the beam without hesitation, leaning her weight against it to keep it steady. The wind picked up, gusting hard enough to make her skirt bell out, but her grip never wavered. The hammer struck true once, twice, 3 times. The nail sank deep into good wood. Another nail, another solid connection. Willa adjusted her hold without being asked, reading what he needed from the angle of his body, the position of the hammer. "You've done this before," he said. "My father was a carpenter before he died. When I was 12, she shifted to brace the next board. "Edgar didn't know that when he married me. Thought I was just the pretty daughter of a widow who needed money. Were you?" "The widow needed money?" "Yes. Pretty is debatable. But I was also the girl who helped her father frame houses from the time I could hold a hammer. They worked through the morning, rebuilding the coop board by board. Willa knew how to measure twice, cut once, how to hold a saw steady through the stroke, how to drive a nail in 3 hits instead of 10. When sweat ran into Ethan's eyes, she was there with a handkerchief before he could ask. When a board needed steadying, her hands were already in position. "Why didn't you fix this yourself?" he asked as they lifted the last roof board into place. A widow woman doing carpenter work, she held the board while he nailed. Agnes would have had me committed to the state asylum for hysteria. The sun had climbed toward noon, warming the air enough that she'd pushed the sleeves up further, showing arms tanned from garden work, not the pale, soft arm of a banker's wife, but arms that had done real labor when no one was watching. "The books," Ethan said as he drove the last nail home. "Edgar's books you mentioned, the ones that worried Agnes." "In his study." "Show me." The study was exactly what he'd expected. Dark paneling, leather chairs, a desk the size of a dining table, but the ledgers lining the shelves surprised him. 24 at least, each one labeled with dates going back 15 years. Willa pulled one down, opened it on the desk. Edgar's tight handwriting filled the pages, but the organization made no sense. Personal expenses mixed with business loans, credits and debits in the same columns, numbers that didn't sum right. "He never taught you this. Said I wouldn't understand where. Said figures were men's business." He was wrong. Ethan pulled a chair beside hers. "Here, start with assets and liabilities." For the next hour, he walked her through the basics of bookkeeping, how to separate income from expenses, how to track interest on loans, how to spot when someone was cooking the books to hide money. She learned fast, faster than he'd expected. Her finger traced down the columns, catching discrepancies he'd missed on first look. This entry here. She pointed to a line from February. He loaned $200 to J.F., but there's no collateral listed, no payments either. Ethan checked. She was right. And here, another entry. He paid the same invoice twice, 3 weeks apart, also correct. For all his banker's pride, Edgar Thompson had been sloppy with his own records. Or maybe not so sloppy. Maybe deliberate. Look at this. Willa had flipped to another page. Every month, $500 to household expenses. But I ran the household on $50 a month. Where did the rest go? They followed the money through 3 ledgers, tracing it like following a creek upstream. The extra household money went to an account marked only with initials A.T. Agnes Thompson, Willa said quietly. He was giving his sister $450 a month. That's more than most men make in a year. Without telling you, without telling anyone. I think, look. She showed him another column. He was hiding it from the bank, too, listing it as operating expenses. The room had gone quiet, except for the scratch of turning pages. Willa worked through the ledgers with growing confidence, unraveling Edgar's financial secrets thread by thread. Her face had changed the exhaustion, replaced by concentration. Maybe even excitement. You could do this, Ethan said. Run your own accounts, manage the properties. Women don't. You're not women. You're you. And you understand this better than Edgar did. She closed the ledger, ran her fingers across the gold-embossed cover. Agnes would die before she'd let me touch Edgar's business, then let her die mad. That surprised a laugh out of her, short and rusty, but real. The first real laugh he'd heard from her. I should start supper, she said. I should go. Stay. The word came out quick, then softer. Please, it's Sunday. Even the gossips expect Sunday dinner. They ate in her kitchen, larger than his, with windows facing the garden. She'd made pot roast with vegetables from the root cellar, gravy thick enough to stand a spoon in. They didn't talk much, but the silence felt comfortable, earned by the morning's shared work. Thank you, she said, as he prepared to leave. For the coop, for the lesson, for not treating me like I'm made of glass. You're not made of glass. He looked at her, standing in the doorway, the afternoon sun backlighting her hair. You're made of harder stuff than that. He was untying Buck when she called out, Ethan! He turned. There's more in those ledgers. Loans to people all over the county, people who can't pay, people who owe everything to the Thompson Bank. She paused, including Judge Garrett. The implications hung between them like a loaded gun. How much does the judge owe? $20,000, no collateral, no payment schedule. She stepped onto the porch. Edgar owned him, Ethan, and now Agnes owns him. That's why she's so confident about contesting the will. He stood there, holding Buck's reins, understanding flooding through him cold as creek water. Agnes didn't need evidence. She had something better, a judge in her pocket, and the proof to keep him there. Bring the ledgers, he said. Tomorrow night, bring all of them. Why? Because if Agnes wants to play with loaded dice, we'd better learn the game. He was mounting Buck when he saw them 4 riders on the main road heading toward the Thompson house. Agnes's carriage followed behind, black as a funeral procession. Company's coming, he said. Willa looked, and her face went pale as fresh paper. That's Judge Garrett's carriage, and the sheriff. Get inside, lock the doors. They have a key. Edgar gave Agnes a key to everything. The riders were turning up the drive now, horses moving fast. Whatever Agnes had planned, she was done waiting. The riders pulled up in the yard, horses blowing hard from the pace. Sheriff Daniels dismounted first, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Behind him, Judge Garrett's bulk filled the carriage door as he climbed down. His wife following. Agnes came last, arranging her black skirts like she was attending a funeral that hadn't happened yet. "Inside," Ethan said to Willa. "I'll handle this." "No." She straightened her spine, smoothed her apron where the chicken blood had dried to rust-colored stains. "This is my house. For now." They met Agnes's party at the front door. The judge's wife, Ruth Garrett, hung back, her face troubled. Two women Ethan recognized from the Methodist Ladies' Auxiliary flanked Agnes like soldiers. Mrs. Davis, the minister's wife, Mrs. Clark from the Mercantile. "Willa." Agnes's voice carried that false sweetness that meant trouble coming. "We need to discuss your situation." "My situation is fine." "Agnes." "Is it?" Agnes looked past Willa to where Ethan stood. "Mr. Holloway, this is a family matter." "Mr. Holloway was helping me repair the chicken coop," Willa said. "The one that's been falling down since last spring on the Sabbath. The chickens don't know it's Sunday." Agnes's mouth tightened. "We need to speak privately." "No," Willa said. "Whatever you have to say, you can say in front of Mr. Holloway." "Very well." Agnes turned to her audience. "Ladies, you're witnessing this. The widow's refusal to observe proper boundaries." She swept into the house without invitation, the others following. Willa's parlor, the one room she'd kept dusted, filled with black silk and disapproval. Agnes took Edgar's chair by the fireplace. The other women arranged themselves on the horsehair sofa, hands folded, faces set in practiced concern. "Tea?" Willa asked, her voice steady as bedrock. "This isn't a social call," Agnes said. "No, but we're still civilized people." Willa moved to the kitchen, came back with the tea service. Her mother's china, Ethan noticed, not the fancy that Edgar had bought. She poured with steady hands, no tremor, no spill. Even when Agnes started talking, "I've consulted with Judge Garrett about Edgar's will." The judge shifted in his chair, the wood creaking under his weight. His eyes wouldn't quite meet Willa's. "There are provisions," Agnes continued, "moral provisions that Edgar insisted upon. I know what my husband's will says." "Do you?" Agnes pulled papers from her bag. "Let me refresh your memory. The widow shall maintain appropriate moral standing befitting the Thompson name." That's quite specific. Willa set down the teapot, centered it precisely on the tray. "And I have." "Have you?" Agnes's voice sharpened. "Entertaining a man alone multiple times at improper hours. Sharing meals isn't improper. It is when you're a recent widow." Mrs. Davis leaned forward, her face arranged in false sympathy. "My dear, we understand loneliness, but there are proper ways to what to eat, to have one conversation in a day that isn't with chickens." Willa's composure cracked just slightly. "To remember what it feels like to be seen as a person instead of a scandal waiting to happen. You see." Agnes turned to her witnesses. "Hysterical. Edgar always said she was given to fits of emotion." "Edgar said a lot of things." Willa's voice had gone quiet, dangerous quiet. "Would you like me to share some of them from his private papers?" Agnes went still. "What papers?" "The ones in his study, the ones he thought I was too simple to understand." Willa lifted her teacup, took a small sip. $20,000 is a lot of money to loan without collateral, don't you think? Judge Garrett, the judge's face flushed purple. His wife turned to stare at him. "I don't know what you think you found," Agnes started. "I found everything Every loan, every payment to you $450 a month. Agnes, for what you live with the Clarks, you have no expenses. Mrs. Clark's mouth opened in surprise. She hadn't known about the money. Agnes stood, her composure finally breaking. Those are Edgar's private business affairs. They're my affairs now. I'm his widow. His estate passes to me. Willa set down her cup with a small, decisive click. Unless you can prove I've violated the moral clause, which you can't. Can't I? Agnes pulled another paper from her bag. Sheriff Daniels has agreed to investigate reports of improper behavior, immoral conduct, the kind that would nullify your inheritance entirely. Based on what evidence? Based on community testimony. These good Christian women they've seen Mr. Holloway help me repair a chicken coop. They've seen me cook supper for a neighbor. If that's immoral, then Jesus himself was immoral when he ate with tax collectors. Mrs. Davis gasped. Blasphemy. It's Scripture, Willa said calmly. Matthew, chapter 9. Agnes's face had gone red as a brick. You think you're clever, but I have more than testimony. She nodded to the sheriff. Tell her what you found. Sheriff Daniels looked miserable. Found some items on Holloway's property, near the property line. What items? Ethan spoke for the first time. Things missing from the Thompson estate. Silver spoons, a pearl necklace, Edgar's gold watch. Those aren't missing, Willa said. I know exactly where. She stopped. Her face went white. Where they are. Agnes smiled, triumphant, because I reported them missing this morning, and the sheriff found them buried on Mr. Holloway's land. Now, why would stolen goods be on his property unless you two were planning something? You planted them. Ethan's hands had become fists. Prove it, Agnes said. Prove I took items from my own brother's house and buried them on your land. Go ahead. Make that accusation in front of the judge and sheriff. The room had gone silent except for the tick of Edgar's fancy mantel clock. Ruth Garrett was staring at her husband with something like disgust. Mrs. Clark had moved away from Agnes on the sofa, creating distance. You have a choice, Willa. Agnes's voice had gone soft, reasonable. Leave town quietly. Sign over your rights to the estate. I'll give you enough money to start over somewhere else. Say $500. $500 for a $40,000 estate. $500 for a disgraced widow with no options. Agnes moved closer. Or stay and fight. I'll have you arrested for theft. Mr. Holloway, too, as your accomplice. The scandal will be in every newspaper from here to San Antonio. Even if you're acquitted, and you won't be, not with Judge Garrett presiding, you'll never be able to show your face anywhere in Texas. Willa stood slowly, like her bones hurt. She walked up to the window, looked out at the chicken coop Ethan had just repaired. The surviving chickens pecked in the dirt, unaware their world had changed. I need time to think. You have until Tuesday. Court convenes at 10 o'clock. Either you're there to sign the papers or the sheriff arrests you both. Agnes gathered her witnesses. Ladies, I think we're done here. They filed out like a funeral procession in reverse. Ruth Garrett paused at the door, opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, then closed it and followed her husband. When the carriages had gone, Willa sank into a chair, all the steel going out of her spine. She planned this, she said. Every bit of it. We'll fight it. With what? She owns the judge. She has planted evidence. She has witnesses ready to say anything she wants. Willa's hands twisted in her lap. I should have known. Should have seen it coming. Ethan knelt beside her chair. You couldn't have known she'd go this far, couldn't I? She's hated me for 8 years, since the day Edgar brought me home too young, too poor, too common for the Thompson name. Tears ran down her face now, silent. Maybe she's right. Maybe I should just leave. No, it would be easier for both of us. Since when do we do what's easy? She looked at him then, really looked. His face was close enough that she could see the sun lines around his eyes, the scar on his jaw from some long-ago accident, the determined set of his mouth. Why? She asked. Why do you care what happens to me? You know why. I need to hear it. He reached up, brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. His hand was rough from work, gentle in its touch. Because you walked into my empty house and made it feel alive again. Because you see me as more than just another lonely rancher. Because... She leaned forward and kissed him. Not long, not passionate. Just a pressing of lips that said everything words couldn't. When she pulled back, his hand was still on her cheek. That's why Agnes will win, she said softly. Because now it's true. What she's been saying, now we are proper. I don't care. You should. She stood, moved away from him. Tuesday, we have 3 days to figure out how to fight this. The ledgers won't matter if the judge is in her pocket. Willa walked to the window again. Unless what? She turned, and there was something new in her face. Not defeat, something else. Unless we find what Edgar was really hiding, he kept 2 sets of books. Ethan, the ones in the study, and another set somewhere else. I saw him once, late at night, carrying ledgers to the barn we just worked in, the loft. I never went up there. He said it wasn't safe. The boards were rotten. She grabbed his hand. But you tested those boards today when you got the tools. Were they rotten? Ethan thought back. No, solid as rock. Then Edgar lied. Whatever's up there, he didn't want me to find it. They stood there, hands clasped, understanding dawning between them. Tonight, Ethan said, after dark, we look together. She squeezed his hand once, then let go. You should leave now, before anyone sees you. Come back after midnight. He was at the door when she called his name. Ethan, what if we don't find anything? He turned back to. Then Tuesday morning, we face them anyway, with the truth. The truth hasn't mattered so far. Maybe not. But lies have a way of catching up to people. Even Agnes Thompson. He rode away as the sun set, but not home. Instead, he headed for the property line where the sheriff claimed to have found the stolen goods. The holes were still there, freshly dug, but something bothered him about the scene. The dirt was wrong, too fresh to... The holes had been dug today, not yesterday when the sheriff said he'd found the items, which meant someone else knew about Agnes's plan, someone who'd helped her. But who in town would risk that kind of trouble for Agnes Thompson? The first night Willa didn't come. Ethan left the lamp burning until the oil ran low. The wick smoked, filling the kitchen with the smell of burning cotton. He sat at the table with the 2-plate set, the blue willow china she liked, while the beans he'd attempted turned to paste on the stove. 8 o'clock, 9. The clock on the mantel ticked loud enough to hear in the next county. She was being careful, that was all. After Agnes's threats, after the sheriff's discovery, keeping distance made sense. Let the gossips find someone else to tear apart. He ate, standing at the counter, beans like glue in his mouth. The good plates went back in the cupboard. The lamp flame guttered and died, leaving him in darkness the second night. He didn't bother with the lamp at first, just sat in the dark eating cold cornbread and jerky, same as he'd done for years. before she'd walked into his life. But the darkness pressed against him different now. Not the comfortable solitude he'd chosen, but something else. Empty, in a way that had nothing to do with being alone. By 10 o'clock, he'd lit the lamp and set it in the window. Waited another hour, nothing. The third night, Monday night, with Tuesday's hearing looming like a thunderhead, he rode to her place after dark. Took the back way through the cedar breaks, Buck picking his way, careful in the moonlight. No lights showed in the Thompson house, not even in the kitchen where she always kept one burning. The windows stared black as closed eyes. He circled the property, looking for signs. Her buggy sat in the barn, but the mare's stall was empty. The chickens were gone from the repaired coop, not dead, just gone. Like someone had loaded them in crates and taken them at the back door. He found what he'd feared, a note tacked to the frame, his name written in Agnes's precise hand. She's safe. She's with family. She won't be at tomorrow's hearing. Neither should you be. Family. Willa had no family. She'd told him her mother died 2 winters back. No siblings, no cousins close enough to matter, which meant Agnes's family, the ones who'd help Agnes steal everything Edgar had left his widow. Ethan crumpled the note in his fist. The Clarks, where Agnes lived, no, too obvious. The judge's house, possible. But Ruth Garrett had looked troubled yesterday. Might not cooperate. Then he remembered Agnes had mentioned cousins in Millbrook, 30 miles east, the Fredericks, wheat farmers with a spread big enough to hide someone who didn't want to be found, or someone being held against their will. He was back on Buck and riding before he'd finished the thought. Midnight now, the moon high and bright enough to throw shadows. 30 miles would take till dawn if he pushed. The hearing was at 10. If Willa wasn't there, Agnes won by default. The road to Millbrook was mostly deer track and wagon ruts, winding through limestone hills and across creeks running low this time of year. Buck was strong but not young, and after 2 hours Ethan had to slow the pace or risk killing the horse. He stopped at Widow Creek to let Buck drink, knelt beside him to splash cold water on his own face. In the moonlight reflected on the water, he saw himself clear, hollow-eyed, 3 days of beard, shirt soaked with sweat despite the cold night. He looked like what he was, a desperate man chasing after something he'd only just realized he couldn't lose 3 weeks ago. He'd been content with empty, content with silence, content with beans burned in a pan and nobody to care. Then Willa Thompson had walked into his kitchen with her straight spine and steady hands, and empty had turned into lonely. Lonely had turned into waiting, and waiting had turned into this riding through the night like a man possessed, because the thought of going back to empty was worse than any scandal Agnes could create. Buck lifted his head from the water, ears pricked forward, hoofbeats coming from the west, multiple horses riding fast. Ethan pulled Buck into the shadows of the cottonwoods, hand on the horse's neck to keep him quiet. 3 riders passed, heading toward Millbrook. Even in moonlight, he recognized the lead rider's bulk, Sheriff Daniels. The other 2 were deputies he'd hired for tomorrow's hearing. Why was the sheriff heading to Millbrook in the middle of the night? Ethan waited until they were well past, then followed at a distance. The sky was graying toward dawn when Millbrook appeared. A handful of buildings clustered around a grain elevator. The sheriff's horses were tied outside the largest house on the main street, 3 stories of limestone with iron railings. Fancy as anything in Austin. The Frederick house. Ethan tied Buck in a grove of pecans behind the property, approached on foot. Light showed in the kitchen windows. Voices carried on the still air. Agnes's sharp tone, a man's deeper rumble, the sheriff's laugh. He circled to the side of the house, where rose trellises climbed to second-floor windows. One window was lit through the lace curtains. A shadow moved back and forth, pacing, Small stones lay scattered beneath the roses. Ethan picked one up, tossed it at the window. The shadow stopped. The curtain pulled back. Willa's face appeared, pale in the lamplight. She saw him, and her hand flew to her mouth. Then she was working at the window latch, pulling it up just enough to speak through. "You can't be here." Her voice came out, whisper soft but urgent. "They're watching the roads. They knew you'd come. Get your things. I can't. They've locked me in. Agnes has the key." She glanced back at the door. "The hearing is in 4 hours. We can make it if we leave now. Ethan, listen. Agnes has more than planted evidence. She has a witness who'll swear they saw us together, intimately. Someone respectable enough that the judge has to believe them." "Who?" "She won't say, but she's confident. Too confident." Willa's fingers gripped the window frame. "You should run. Leave Texas. Start over somewhere they can't reach you." "Not without you." "This isn't your fight. It became my fight the night you cooked me supper." He moved closer to the wall, looking up at her. "Can you climb down the trellis? In these skirts, and they've got a man watching the back door." Footsteps in the hall behind her. Willa jerked back from the window. "Tomorrow," she whispered, "after the hearing, whatever happens." A key rattled in the lock. The window slammed shut, curtain falling back in place. Agnes's voice carried through the glass. "Who were you talking to?" "Myself. Praying. Praying won't help you now." Ethan pressed against the wall as more lights came on. Through the kitchen window, he could see Sheriff Daniels drinking coffee, his deputies playing cards. No way to get Willa out past them. Not without violence. And that would only prove Agnes's claims about his character. He made it back to Buck as full dawn broke. The ride to town would take 3 hours if he pushed hard. Time to wash, change clothes, get to the courthouse, face whatever Agnes had planned. But first, one stop. The barn at the Thompson place stood empty in the morning light. Ethan climbed to the loft, tested each board, all solid, just as he'd thought. In the back corner, behind stacked hay that hadn't been touched in months, he found a trunk, locked. But the iron was old, rusted. His knife blade worked into the gap, and the lock snapped. Inside, ledgers, the real ones. And on top, a letter in Edgar's handwriting addressed to Willa. "If you're reading this, I'm dead, and you're finally free of me." Ethan read the first paragraph and felt his blood turn to ice water. Edgar Thompson had known he was dying months before he told anyone, had known what Agnes would do, had planned for it. But the rest of the letter was gone, torn away. Only that first paragraph remained, and a dark stain across the bottom that looked like old blood. Someone had been here first. Someone had taken what Edgar meant Willa to find. At the bottom of the trunk, under the ledgers, Ethan's fingers found something else. A piece of paper, newer than the rest. He pulled it out, recognized the cream-colored stock from Morrison's store, the same paper the threatening notes to Willa had been written on. But this wasn't a threat. It was a receipt for $500 worth of goods, paid in advance. The signature at the bottom made Ethan's hand clench around the paper. The person helping Agnes destroy Willa wasn't who anyone would expect. The courthouse steps were already crowded when Ethan arrived. Half the town had gathered, some for spectacle, some for judgment, most just to watch their neighbors fall. Women in their Tuesday best whispered behind gloved hands. Men in work clothes, taking time from harvest, stood in clusters smoking pipes. Agnes Thompson held court at the top of the steps like she'd already won. Black dress, black gloves, the same mourning veil she'd worn for 6 months. Judge Garrett stood beside her. thick fingers drumming against his watch chain. They were talking low, heads bent together like conspirators at a prayer meeting. Ethan had changed into his father's funeral suit. The cuffs were short and the shoulders tight, but it was clean. The receipt from Morrison's store sat folded in his breast pocket, along with Edgar's torn letter. Not enough to save Willa, maybe, but enough to raise questions. If she came, if Agnes hadn't locked her away somewhere worse than the Frederick house? The courthouse bell rang 9:30. People began filing inside, the benches filling with familiar faces. Mrs. Morrison near the front, broom nowhere in sight but her mouth already pursed in disapproval. Sam from the freight office, looking uncomfortable. The Hendricks family, even the children dressed in their Sunday clothes. No Willa. Ethan took a seat in the third row, where he could see both doors. The receipt burned against his ribs. Should he reveal it now? Wait for the right moment. Without Willa here, did it even matter? Judge Garrett took his place behind the high bench, gavel heavy in his hand. Agnes sat at the plaintiff's table with a lawyer from Austin, thin as a fence post, with eyes that never stopped moving. The defendant's table stood empty. This hearing concerns the moral provisions in Edgar Thompson's last will and testament. Garrett's voice filled the room like thunder. Miss Agnes Thompson has filed complaint against the widow, Mrs. Willa Thompson, alleging violation of said provisions through inappropriate behavior with Mr. Ethan Holloway. The Austin lawyer stood. Your Honor, we note that Mrs. Thompson has failed to appear. We request a default judgment in favor of... The main door opened. Every head turned. Willa stood in the doorway wearing a gray dress, not black, not colors, something in between. Her hair was pulled back so tight it stretched the skin at her temples. Behind her, Sheriff Daniels and his deputies formed a wall, having delivered her like a prisoner to trial. She walked down the aisle, chin up, looking at no one, sat at the defendant's table alone, no lawyer, no papers, just her. Mrs. Thompson, Judge Garrett's tone suggested the outcome was already decided. You've been accused of violating the moral provisions of your late husband's will. How do you answer? Willa stood. Everything Agnes has said is true, Your Honor. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Agnes smiled behind her veil. I have visited Mr. Holloway's home. I have cooked meals there. We have spent time together unchaperoned. Willa's voice carried clear and steady. Because I was lonely, and he was kind. And there's no sin in sharing a meal with another Christian soul. The appearance of impropriety up... The lawyer started. Is not impropriety itself. Willa turned to face the crowd. How many of you have eaten alone night after night? How many of you have set one plate at a table made for 6? How many know what it sounds like when the only voice you hear all day is your own? Some faces softened. Mrs. Hendricks wiped at her eyes. She'd been widowed young before Jonas came along. Your Honor, Agnes stood. May I present additional evidence? Garrett nodded. The lawyer produced the wooden box Ethan had heard about the planted evidence. But when he opened it, Agnes's face changed. The box was empty. Where are... These aren't... She spun toward the sheriff. You said you secured the evidence. Sheriff Daniels shrugged. Must have misplaced it. Misplaced? Agnes's voice went shrill. You misplaced evidence. Happens sometimes. The sheriff's face stayed bland as buttermilk, especially evidence that was never stolen in the first place. The courtroom erupted. Judge Garrett hammered his gavel hard enough to crack the sound block. Order, Sheriff Daniels. Explain yourself. Well, Your Honor, funny thing, I went to verify the stolen items against the household inventory, and Mrs. Thompson here had already reported them. 3 days before they were supposedly stolen, said She was lending them to Miss Agnes for an estate evaluation. Agnes went white as fresh paper. That's a lie. Got the paperwork right here. The sheriff pulled out a folded document, Mrs. Thompson's signature, dated Thursday last, and Miss Agnes's signature, receiving them. I never signed. Your signature's on file at the bank, Miss Thompson. We can compare them if you'd like. Ethan stood. Your Honor, I have something to add. Garrett's face was already red, but it darkened further. You're not a party to this proceeding, Mr. Holloway. I am now. He pulled out the receipt from Morrison's store. This shows payment for goods delivered to Miss Agnes Thompson. $500 worth, paid in advance. The same amount she offered Mrs. Thompson to leave town. He handed the receipt to the sheriff, who looked at the signature and whistled low. Well, I'll be, Mrs. Morrison. You want to explain why you were bankrolling Miss Agnes? Mrs. Morrison shot to her feet. I don't know what you're talking about. Your husband's signature is right here. Unless you're saying he took $500 from the store without telling you? Morrison himself stood up in the back row, face gray. Louise, what did you do? I was protecting the town's moral standards. That woman, she pointed at Willa, carrying on like a what? The voice came from the back of the room. Ruth Garrett, the judge's own wife, stood in the aisle. She never spoke at public proceedings, but she was speaking now. Go on, Mrs. Morrison. Say what you think Willa Thompson is. Say it out loud so everyone can hear. Mrs. Morrison's mouth opened and closed, but no words came. Ruth Garrett walked forward, past her husband's bench, and stood beside Willa. I have something to say. Ruth, this isn't the time. Judge Garrett started. It's exactly the time. She faced the crowd. Edgar Thompson was my cousin. You all know that. What you don't know is what he told me before he died. The courtroom went silent. He was dying of cancer, had been for months. He knew Agnes would try to take everything from Willa. Knew she'd use that moral clause he'd been forced to include. Ruth's voice got stronger. He told me Willa was the only good thing in his life. The only person who saw him as human instead of a bank account. He wanted her to be happy, to be free. You're lying, Agnes hissed. Am I? Should I tell them about the other ledgers? Agnes, the ones showing how much you've taken from the estate, $500 a month for household expenses when you live with the Clarks. Agnes went silent. Or should I tell them about Judge Garrett's loans? $20,000 with no collateral. Ruth turned to her husband. Did you think I didn't know? Harold, did you think I was too simple to understand numbers? Judge Garrett's gavel slipped from his hand, clattered on the floor. Old Sam stood up. I got something to say, too. Then Mrs. Hendricks. So do I. One by one. People stood. Not everyone. Miss Morrison stayed seated, face red as a beet. But enough. They talked about Willa bringing food when they were sick, teaching their children to read, never asking for anything back. She taught my Emma her letters, the gunsmith said. My wife died last year, and I didn't know what to do with the girl. Mrs. Thompson just showed up one day with books and patience. Pastor Davis's wife stood. Mr. Holloway and Mrs. Thompson have done nothing wrong. They've been good Christian neighbors to each other. If that's a sin, then we're all sinners. It is a sin, Agnes shrieked. They're carrying on what we're carrying on. Ethan said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Is a friendship based on respect and loneliness and the need for human company? If you see more than that, maybe you need to examine your own heart. Judge Garrett retrieved his gavel, banged it weakly. In light of conflicting testimony and lack of physical evidence. His wife cleared her throat. He looked at her, and something passed between them, 40 years of marriage compressed into a look. "Case dismissed," he said quietly. "All provisions of Edgar Thompson's will stand as written." Agnes made a sound like a stepped-on cat. "You can't, this isn't—" "It's over, Agnes." Ruth Garrett's voice was steel. "Take what your brother left you and be grateful, or we can discuss those fraudulent loans in open court." Agnes looked around the courtroom, at faces turned against her, at her schemes crumbling, at Willa, sitting quiet and dignified in gray. Without another word, she fled, the Austin lawyer scrambling to follow. The courtroom emptied slowly, people stopping to speak to Willa, to touch her shoulder, to murmur apologies or support. She accepted it all with grace. But Ethan could see the exhaustion in the line of her shoulders. When they were finally alone, she turned to him. "You came for me, to Millbrook." "I did. That was foolish, maybe." She stood, and for the first time since entering the courtroom, she smiled, small and tired, but real. "Thank you." Pastor Davis appeared beside them, his wife at his elbow. "Mr. Holloway, Mrs. Thompson, after what we've witnessed today, if you'd like, I'm authorized to perform marriages, not saying you should, but if you wanted to silence the gossips permanently." Willa's hand found Ethan's. "Yes." "Now?" Ethan asked. "Now, here, before Agnes finds another way to interfere." It wasn't romantic. No flowers, no music, no wedding dress, just Willa in gray and Ethan in his father's too-small suit, standing before Pastor Davis while his wife and Sam served as witnesses. Judge Garrett had fled, but Ruth stayed, adding her signature to the certificate. "Do you have rings?" Pastor Davis asked. Ethan pulled off the band he'd worn on a chain since his first wife died. It was too big for Willa's finger, but she closed her fist to keep it from sliding off. "I now pronounce you husband and wife." They kissed briefly, aware of the watching eyes, but Ethan felt Willa's hand tremble in his. When they pulled apart, she whispered, "The ledgers? Did you find them?" "Some, but there's more." "Edgar left something else." "What?" Before he could answer, Sheriff Daniels approached. "Congratulations, folks. But Mrs. Holloway, there's something you should know. Agnes is at your house, Edgar's house. She's got men with her. They're loading wagons." Willa's face went hard. "She's stealing what she couldn't win. They took Ethan's wagon, Willa beside him on the bench seat, still wearing her gray court dress." Neither spoke during the ride. Sheriff Daniels followed with 2 deputies, their horses kicking up dust in the October air. The Thompson house came into view, and Ethan counted 3 wagons in the yard. Men were carrying furniture out the front door, the rosewood parlor set, the grandfather clock from the hall, rolled carpets balanced on their shoulders. Agnes stood on the porch directing them, like a general at war, still in her widow's black. "That's my mother's china cabinet," Willa said quietly, watching 2 men struggle with the cherrywood piece. "From Tennessee." Ethan pulled the wagon up, blocking the drive. Agnes saw them, and her spine went rigid. "Get off my property," she called out. "Your property." Willa climbed down from the wagon, Ethan's mother's wedding ring loose on her finger. "Show me the deed." "Edgar was my brother, and I was his wife, am now Ethan's wife. But the house is mine either way." Willa walked through the yard, past the men who'd stopped loading to watch. "Sheriff Daniels, these men are stealing from my home." The sheriff dismounted, his deputies flanking him. "That true. Miss Thompson, you removing property without permission. Family heirlooms," Agnes said quickly. "Things that belonged to our parents." "The china cabinet came with me from Tennessee," Willa said. "The carpets were purchased 2 years ago from Dallas." "Should I go through the whole list?" One of the moving men set down his end of a rosewood sofa. "Miss Thompson, You said the house was yours. It should be, but it ain't. The man looked at his partner. We're done here. Come on, boys. They started unloading the wagons, carrying furniture back inside despite Agnes's protest. She followed them, voice getting shriller. With each piece they returned. You can't do this. I'm Edgar Thompson's sister, his blood. And blood doesn't mean ownership, Sheriff Daniels said. Unless you got papers saying different, this is theft. Agnes turned on Willa, face twisted with rage. You poisoned him against me. 8 years of marriage and no children. What kind of wife were you? What kind of woman? The kind who stayed. Willa's voice came out steady. When the doctor said cancer, when he stopped eating, when he cried from the pain, where were you, Agnes? Where was his blood family then? He never told me he was sick, because you never asked, too busy counting what you'd inherit. Agnes raised her hand like she might strike Willa. Ethan stepped between them. You're done here, he said. Get in your carriage and leave. This isn't over. Yes, Ruth Garrett said from the doorway. It is. The judge's wife stood there holding a leather portfolio. She opened it, pulled out papers covered in Edgar's handwriting. The rest of Edgar's letter, she said. The part Agnes tore away when she found it. Edgar gave me a copy before he died, told me to use it if Agnes tried this. She handed it to Willa, who read aloud. If you're reading this, I'm dead and you're finally free of me. Agnes will try to take everything. She always believed she deserved it more, but I'm leaving it to you. Not from love we both know that died years ago, but from respect. You stayed when you had every reason to leave. You were faithful when I was cold. You grieved our babies alone when I couldn't bear to acknowledge them. The money, the house, its small payment for 8 years of loneliness. Be happy. Willa, find someone who sees you. You deserve that much. Agnes's face had gone gray. He wouldn't, that's forged. It's in Edgar's hand. Ruth said, I watched him write it, February 10th, 2 weeks before he died. The movers had finished unloading. They stood by their empty wagons, waiting. Agnes looked around at the sheriff, at Ruth Garrett, at Willa, standing beside Ethan, and seemed to shrink into herself. I have nothing, she whispered. He left me nothing but a small allowance. He left you $500 a month, Willa said. That's more than most families see in a year. It's not enough, not for what I'm owed. What are you owed, Agnes? Ruth asked. For being born a Thompson, for treating his wife like dirt, for trying to steal what he chose to give her. Agnes had no answer. She climbed into her carriage, and Ethan noticed her hands shaking as she took the reins. Not from rage anymore, from something else. The recognition, maybe, that she'd lost more than money. She'd lost whatever family meant. She drove away without looking back. The sheriff tipped his hat. Reckon that's settled. Congratulations on the wedding, folks. After everyone left, Ethan and Willa stood alone in the big house. Late afternoon light slanted through windows, showing dust motes disturbed by all the moving. The furniture sat askew, carpets unrolled but crooked. We should go, Ethan said. It's getting late. Where? Willa looked around the oversized rooms. This is mine now, but it's never been home. My place then, our place. She smiled at that, the first real smile he'd seen all day. Our place. I like how that sounds. They loaded what mattered into the wagon her mother's rocking chair, the kitchen things she'd grown fond of, the ledgers from Edgar's study. The rest could wait. Or maybe it would wait forever. The Thompson house could stand empty as a monument to Edgar's ambition. Willa didn't seem to care. That night, in Ethan's small kitchen, Willa cooked supper like she had that first night beef stew cornbread and coffee strong enough to float horseshoes. But this time, she sat beside him instead of across. This time her plate stayed full because she ate instead of just pushing food around. This time when their hands touched reaching for the salt, neither pulled away. "We need to talk practical things," she said, as they washed dishes together. "The properties, the accounts. Tomorrow. The cattle you're buying next month. Tomorrow." She turned from the wash basin, soap suds still on her hands. "What about tonight? Tonight we're married. Tonight you're here. Tonight that's enough." Spring came slow to the hill country that year. March stayed cold. April brought floods. May couldn't decide if it was winter or summer. But by June the garden Willa had planted was coming up, green corn and beans and squash, tomatoes already setting fruit. Ethan found her there one morning, on her knees in the dirt, hands deep in the soil. She'd taken to wearing his old shirts while gardening, her good dresses saved for town. Her hair had lightened from all the sun, and her arms had gone brown and strong, talking to the plants again. She looked up, dirt smudged on her cheek. "They grow better with conversation." "That's so. Your mother knew it." Found her journal in the barn loft, full of planting wisdom. As she stood, one hand pressed to her lower back, also found more of Edgar's records. He was hiding money from the bank, thousands. "Agnes?" "No. For us. Well, for me." He knew he was dying longer than anyone thought, started moving money into accounts Agnes couldn't touch. She pulled a folded paper from her pocket. $15,000 in a Dallas bank under my maiden name. Ethan whistled low. "That's enough to buy half the county. Or to help people who need it." She looked toward the road. "The Hendricks are struggling. Jonas hurt his back. Can't bring in harvest alone. The Mitchells need a new well. Emma Carter's father wants to send her to school in Austin but can't afford it. So we help them?" Just like that, just like that. She kissed him then, there in the garden, with dirt on her hands and sun in her hair. When she pulled back, she was smiling. "There's something else. More hidden money." "No." She took his hand, placed it on her belly. "Hidden maybe, but not money." The fabric was warm from the sun, and underneath it, the slightest curve that hadn't been there a month ago. "You're sure?" "Sure as I can be. October, I think, maybe November." He kept his hand there, feeling the solid truth of it. After the babies she'd lost with Edgar. After 3 years since Mary died childless. Here was hope growing like the garden around them. "You're scared," he said. Not a question. "Every day. Me too." "But not alone," she said. "Not this time." September brought harvest. The garden produced more than 2 people could eat, could can, could store. Willa organized what she called sharing days, neighbors coming to take what they needed, leaving what they could spare. The Hendricks brought eggs. The Mitchells shared milk from their cow. Emma Carter and her father came with fresh bread. The kitchen that had once held 2 lonely people now regularly held 6, 8, sometimes 10. Emma worked on her letters at the table while her father fixed Ethan's harness. Mrs. Hendricks taught Willa to knit tiny baby clothes while Jonas and Ethan talked about next year's planting. "You've made this place something," Jonas said one evening as children ran through the house. "Used to be just a house. Now it's full," Ethan finished. Was going to say home, but full works too. October came with blue northers and leaf smoke. Willa was round enough now that she couldn't hide it. Not that she tried. The church ladies who'd once whispered now brought baby blankets and advice. Even Mrs. Morrison, shamed into civility, offered her mother's birthing wisdom. The first pain came at dawn on October 23rd. Ethan rode hard for the midwife, harder for the doctor, though Willa said neither was necessary. Women have been doing this since Eve," she said between contractions. "Not my woman," he said. "Not alone." It took 14 hours. Ethan stayed despite the midwife trying to shoo him out. He held Willa's hand while she crushed his fingers, wiped sweat from her face, prayed harder than he'd prayed since his parents died. Then crying, not Willa's exhausted tears, but the fierce, angry cry of new life. "A girl," the midwife announced. "Small, but perfect." Willa reached for her with shaking arms. The baby was red-faced and wrinkled, with a shock of dark hair like her mother's. When she opened her eyes, they were gray, like the dress Willa had worn to court. "Sarah," Willa whispered. "Her name is Sarah." "After the first one," Ethan said. "After both of them. The ones who didn't make it, but mattered anyway." That evening, as Sarah slept in the cradle Jonas Hendricks had made, and Willa dozed in their bed, Ethan sat at the kitchen table where it all started. 2 plates still sat there, the blue willow china, but now cups and bowls surrounded them. Evidence of the sharing days, the reading lessons, the community that had grown from 2 lonely people eating supper. Someone knocked softly. Emma Carter stood at the door with her father. "We don't want to disturb," the gunsmith said. "Just wanted to leave this." Emma handed over a package wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a tiny quilt, each square embroidered with a letter of the alphabet. "For when she's ready to learn," Emma said. "Mrs. Holloway taught me, so I can teach her." After they left, Ethan found Willa awake, nursing Sarah in the lamplight. "You heard?" "I heard." She shifted the baby to her shoulder, patting her back in small circles. "This is what Edgar never understood. Money isn't wealth. This is wealth. People who show up, people who care, people who cook supper when you're too tired to eat." She smiled at that. "People who eat it even when it's burned." It was only burned that once. 3 times. But who's counting? Sarah burped, a surprisingly large sound from such a small body. They both laughed, quiet enough not to startle her. "Next year," Willa said, "I want to start a proper school, use some of Edgar's money to build it." "All right." "And dig a well for the Mitchells." "All right." "And maybe sell the Thompson house. Use the money for Willa." He leaned over, kissed her forehead. "All right. Whatever you want. But tonight, just this, just us." She settled back against the pillows, Sarah sleeping on her chest. The lamp flickered, casting shadows on the walls. Through the window, stars were coming out, bright as promises in the Texas sky. The lamp would burn all night. Not as a signal any more, those days were past. Now it burned because someone might need something. A cup of coffee, a word of advice, a reminder that empty was just another word for waiting to be filled. And this house, this kitchen, this table that had started with 2 plates and grown to hold a community, it would never be empty again. "You know, I passed by the old Holloway place last Sunday. It's the Carter place now. Emma married well and teaches school there. But folks still call it the lamp house, as that lamp still burns every evening, though Ethan and Willa are long gone, buried side by side under the oak tree they planted when Sarah was born. Their granddaughter keeps the tradition alive. She tells me the house has never been empty since that September night in 883, when a desperate widow broke into a lonely man's kitchen. Funny how 2 plates at a table can change a whole town's future, isn't it? Disclaimer. This story, inspired by Western frontier narratives of the 80s, was created solely for entertainment purposes. This work does not condone, encourage, or promote any form of violence or harmful behavior. All characters and events depicted are products of the author's imagination. Any resemblance to real persons, living or deceased, or actual events is purely coincidental The story explores themes of community, loneliness, and human connection in a historical context while maintaining respect for all individuals.